Rebecca Hall in a haunted lake house movie with really good effects? Sign me up. Hey everyone, this is David Stark from Watch or Pass, and I'm here to talk to you about The Night House, which is released in theaters on August 20th, 2021. It's kind of an atmospheric horror film that stars Rebecca Hall and a whole bunch of other people, but mostly Rebecca Hall, because she kind of plays the main character. She's alone in this lake house that she and her husband, I guess, used to own, but as you find out early on in the film, her husband committed suicide randomly, and she is there to pick up her life, try to figure out what happened, and also try to move on. But can she when she's convinced that the house is haunted? Well, I guess we'll find out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the film. I'm going to talk about three things I liked about it, three things I didn't like about it, and then go into the ending. So, as you can imagine, there will be spoilers. So if you don't want to know anything about the film, you don't want to know what happens, then check out the review on watcherpass.com, or just go watch it in theaters when it comes out on August 20th and then come back and watch this video. But if you don't care, you really want to know what strange haunting occurs, then we can keep talking. So in the night house, when she goes back to the house, she starts to feel some ghostly presences and reminders of her husband. And it's strange. So at the start, you don't really know if it's sinister or comforting. She will, some music will come on and I think reminds her of him, but it's the middle of the night and no one's there, or the door will slam closed, or there will be a knocking. And so you get the sense that she's also a little conflicted. I think she's a little bit worried about what happened, but then also she's a little comforted by the fact that she thinks her husband is there. But sometimes it's a little sinister, like some very loud music will start playing in the middle of the night and it kind of jolts her up. And so I think the film kind of has you explore this and has you explore the reasons for why there might still be a ghostly presence there. And it goes into some weird places. And I actually appreciate it. I kind of wish it were a little more extreme, but we'll get into that, my things I liked and things I didn't like. So things I liked. The first thing I really liked is the setting. I mean, when I saw the trailer, I saw like snippets of it, saw the poster, saw in the first like 5 minutes of this, I knew I was going to love this film because it's got Rebecca Hall, who is a fantastic actor, and she does a really, really good job in this film. But it also has this wonderful like wilderness lake setting. It's isolated. It's out in the woods, so it gets really dark at night. You don't really have much around you, and it's a perfect setting for a haunting horror type movie. And the setting really doesn't help here because you do have this isolated place where she doesn't really have neighbors by her. If something goes wrong, they can't hear her. If she's yelling, no one comes to the door. And so it's really kind of her on her own dealing with whatever this is that's in her house. The second thing I really love is the understated nature of the haunting itself. I really like films that don't go overboard on effects if they don't have to. And this is one that does just such a really, really good job. It's a fantastic job of keeping everything muted. So, you don't have this like ghost presence that pops out, and scares her. You don't have this, these things flying around the house. You don't have anything that goes a little too far. It's all very subtle. So like the stereo will turn on this song that maybe she remembers, or there's a really, really good creepy scene where like ghostly footprints will appear on the dock, and kind of as she's when light goes up and the light goes down, there's more footprints and they get closer and closer. So the film itself does a really good job of kind of holding back and not trying to do too much, and it kind of lets the setting and the atmosphere and just the situation in general give you the unease rather than trying to force it with effects. And I really appreciated that. It kind of fits in with the setting, but this is a separate thing I also liked. And the last thing is the cast overall, but mostly Rebecca Hall, because she does a really good job. She is essentially on her own in this film in a lot of it. Like she is pushing the plot, she's pushing the haunting all by herself with maybe a little bit of effects here and there. And she does a really, really good job. I mean, she's a great actor already, but allowing her to kind of show fear, show paranoia, do this, investigate what happens. And there is a lot more to this story than just your typical person commits suicide, stays behind in the house. Like there is more to this story that we will get into in the ending. And Rebecca Hall is kind of the driving force behind this. So things I didn't quite love, and to be clear, I really liked this movie. I'm still in my mind wondering, trying to figure out what exact rating it should be. But I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the movie. I liked a lot about it. But the things I didn't really love, the story didn't quite come together. It has so the Night House has this interesting dichotomy where you have a kind, a main, the main living world, and then the world of the dead. And the world of the dead, as far as I understand, and if I'm getting this wrong, because maybe someone with better background or who is a little more observant during the film, please correct me. Please comment on the review. I'd love to know more, and I'd love to kind of go through theories with people because I really enjoy that as well. But it has this kind of dichotomy of the living world and then kind of the world of the dead, which is more of I guess it's a backwards world. Things kind of happen in almost a mirror, like a sinister mirror. And so the film, you find out during the story that there is a whole separate house that Rebecca Hall's husband was building that was kind of a mirror image of her house, but had a lot of more sinister, horrible things happening there. And so the film goes into this idea where you can kind of pass through, or the spirits can pass through between these mirror images, but it didn't really quite come together. I think there were some theories in the notes from her husband that would have been more interesting, things to try to confuse the spirits, things to try to keep them trapped, that didn't ever really come up again. I think it seemed like the film had some more ideas for how they could explore this, but then they didn't for whatever reason. It probably, maybe it was too difficult, maybe it would have been too confusing, I'm not sure, but I do wish it would have explored that. The second thing is the film didn't really go as extreme as I was expecting. This is kind of related to the story didn't quite come together. So a good example of kind of what I was hoping to see, I think, is something more akin to like Relic, where when the person passed into the other world, the underworld, it changed pretty dramatically. And I think what they were going for in this film is to have it be much more subtle. You wouldn't necessarily have like a dilapidated place with a weird glow, or like a weird filter on the air to really let you know. Part of the idea, I think, in this film was to have it be less certain which side you were on. And there were hints that you could get to figure out if Rebecca Hall was in I guess the living world or the dead world, and that they became more obvious as the film went on. But it never really got to kind of a more extreme that I was hoping for, something that would be very emblematic of what was happening. And also, the film has some extreme-ish elements, like things that happened that the husband did, but they're never really depicted, and they're hinted at, and I'm fine with that. It felt like there was more to this story, and the film could have gone a little bit more on the extreme part. And I know that this criticism completely contradicts with my understated nature criticism, but I would have liked if it was a clearer push into the other world, because Rebecca Hall kind of goes into it and then seems to be able to kind of filter in and out. And maybe that's part of the idea. Maybe it's the idea was that you were not able to necessarily determine all the time which side you were in, and that's why it made it so scary. But I wish that the film would have gone a little bit more onto the extreme ends of some of the ideas. And that's, I guess that's kind of similar to the story didn't come together, but the notes had things about how you had to confuse the other world presences. You had to build mazes or special type houses to trap the demons or whatever they were. And none of this seemed to be explored later on. Like, he was building this house, but the house just looked like a conventional house that was on the other side of the lake, and also was, I guess, a backwards version of it. So I guess I would have hoped that the film would have really explored that. Maybe she goes into this house and then sees her house, except everything is a little bit different. There's like a corridor that doesn't exactly end, or there's, maybe it goes underground rather than above ground, like something that would have been a little bit more along the lines of what it seemed to be kind of building to. And the last thing that was a little disappointing is the ending, and I'll go into that right now. But I think the ending, again, this film had some really, really interesting ideas and some really good setup. I just don't think it came together in the end. So in the end, we find out that I mentioned Rebecca Hall's husband is building a whole nother house on the other side of the lake. Um, and eventually she's going through his phone and sees a picture of someone that looks very much like her. You can't really tell. Her friends think it's her, but she notices something about the picture that's not her. Maybe it was a mole or something that she has that this picture of this woman doesn't have. And so that leads her to then try to figure out, are there more women? She goes through and tries to find the pictures from her husband's phone, and lo and behold, there are pictures of lots of women that look very much like her. And so she gets a little concerned. And at the same time, she eventually she finds this other house, this separate house on the other side that's exactly like her house. Her husband's notes have some mentions of a like opposite house, or another type house, but she goes to it, and when she gets there, it's a little bit run down, but she kind of tells whatever presence is there and I'm just going to call it the presence. I don't remember exactly what they called it in the film. I'm going to call it the presence, to like show her what is happening, what has happened. And eventually, as she's walking around, her leg goes through a board. She opens it up, and inside there's just a row of bodies wrapped in plastic underneath the house. And so that freaks her out, understandably. So she goes back to the main. I think she realizes that these bodies are the bodies of these women that he has been trying to or that he has pictures of. And so she goes back to the house, and I think in this she's a little confused, and so she eventually feels the presence, and she says essentially like she begins to physically feel the presence, like the presence is there, and her, like, she can actually touch whatever is there, like it's like an invisible man kind of thing. Her fingers look like they're pressing against something, but there's nothing there. And so the ghostly presence kind of caresses her, and I think she's confused but also happy that her husband is back, and so she says his name. She says Owen, and the voice says, "No, I'm not Owen." And then that kind of freaks her out, and in the mirror she sees one of those girls that she had seen before, one of the girls that she had seen a picture of, and she sees her husband doing something terrible in the mirror. And then the ghost presence starts to do the same to her, starts to bend her back. There's this like statue in the film of like a figure bent over backwards with like pins in them, like a voodoo-ish statue or like a contortionist type of statue. And so the presence starts to do that to her, and then slams her head against the mirror, and then she appears to then go into the backwards world, is kind of the implication. And in the backwards world, she sees Owen dragging a body back, and he starts to kind of craft that body into the statue present, the statue that is kind of pervasive in this film. And then she also keeps seeing hints of the present. And it's interesting. I didn't love how they did this, because they basically just made the presence be like an outline of a person's face that would appear. So like she'd look up at a rafter, and there'd be like a person's face outline in the rafter. So you didn't actually see it, which I guess was what they were going for. They didn't want to ever fully kind of realize it, but it did feel like a little odd, that you never actually saw the presence. But in any event, she's going through the house, and she keeps seeing Owen, her husband, doing terrible things to different women in the various rooms of the house. And then the presence drags her down into the basement. As she's exploring the house, she eventually gets pulled, and she gets pulled down into the basement. And when she's going down, the presence tells her, "I'm what you felt when your heart stopped," because it's revealed earlier that Rebecca Hall had previously died for, I believe, 4 minutes. And so she had gone to, like, she'd been dead, and then she got brought back to life. And so the presence essentially says, like, "I'm what you felt when your heart stopped. Like, I was there when you first died." And so we find out that the presence tried to get Owen, her husband, to send Rebecca Hall back to death, like to essentially kill her, so that she could then go, so then the presence could have her. But he refused, and instead he sent others that looked like her, which I mean, I guess it's noble that her husband didn't kill her, but he killed, like, I don't know, I don't know how many, but like 5, 6 people. I don't on balance, I don't know if he's a good guy I mean, he's definitely a bad guy, but I don't know if it's noble of him to do that or just horribly selfish and terrible. Like, I'm not sure, but it's not good. He probably should, and then he eventually killed himself. He probably should have just killed himself at the start if he was really going through that. Like, do I kill my wife or do I kill 5 or 6 other people? He probably should have just killed himself. Then he wouldn't have had to even have that conversation with himself. But in any event, um, after she finds this out that her husband, is a murderer, and again, it's unclear if it's actually her husband that's doing it or if it's like him possessed that is doing these murders. And I think it's a combination of the two. But after she finds this out, then the president starts to kind of try to craft her again into the voodoo doll, and then it kind of cuts to the day, or I guess the living world, because at this point the worlds are kind of intertwined. And so it cuts to the day, and Beth's friend, who has been in the film, she's been supportive of her as she's dealing with her husband's death. She goes to the house and she sees that everything is kind of messed up, like the bathroom mirror is cracked, some things are turned over, and then it switches back to Beth, and Beth is in the backwards world, the dark world, whatever you want to call it. It's like night there, and she's in a rowboat. And on the rowboat is Ian, or at least something that looks like Ian. And he pulls out a gun, and Beth, or Rebecca Hall, says, "Where is he?" Meaning her husband. And Ian says, "Gone," but you already knew that. So then again, I'm not sure if the presence is referring to the fact that he's dead, or if he's referring to the fact that like Ian didn't commit those crimes. That was actually the presence doing it. I'm not sure. I think it's somewhere in between. I think maybe he realized what he was doing, or at least what the presence was making him do, and he shot himself. But that would also kind of contradict with what the presence says when he said like he kept sending other people to me. So I think Ian did actually kill like 5 or 6 people. So he's kind of a monster. Like, he's a monster. Like, he's a terrible monster, and he probably should have killed himself earlier. But it wouldn't have been an interesting movie if that didn't happen. And so then I think we switch back to the real world, and her friend sees her at the rowboat and like starts to run down to her, and we switch back to Beth, back in the night world with the rowboat. And the presence is trying to convince her to kill herself. He has a gun. He gives her the gun, and he's trying to convince her to kill herself so that then she can be in this night world with the presence. So Beth resists, and she kind of wakes up in the real world, and she sees her friend swimming out to get her on the boat. And her friend grabs her and pulls her into the water. And also before this, her neighbor, who has been in this film before, he told her about the house. Her neighbor sees them and starts running down to the dock. And so her friend pulls her off the boat and into the water and drags her back onto the dock. So after she's back on the dock, apparently she resisted the presence. She looks back at the canoe, and she sees there's like a dark outline, although it could just be the water. It looks like, I mean, I think the film does this a lot, where it tries to make it so that there's totally innocuous explanations for things that could also be supernatural. So you see like a little bit of a dark outline, but it could also just be the water. And her neighbor looks and says, essentially like, "What are you looking at? There's nothing there." And she says, "I know." And then the movie ends. So again, I think I didn't love this ending because it felt there was this divide that happened where you were either in the living world or the dark world. And I guess they did start to bleed over because the presence came into her house, but it felt like I was never clear where that happened. Like what was the way to travel back and forth? And also, she escaped the presence pretty easily, which I would have expected maybe a little bit more of a struggle. She essentially said no, and then like woke up, and then her friend pulled her into the water, and now she's fine, everything's fine. Like, that doesn't seem like a very fulfilling end, because she didn't do anything to like stop the presence. Like, she didn't stop the haunting. I guess maybe if she reports the bodies, maybe that'll, or bulldozes the house or something, maybe that will stop the presence from being able to come there. But it doesn't seem like it would. It feels like the presence got to her husband before the house was built, and so it would probably be back. So maybe, and so like the fact that it's just kind of over didn't feel right. I felt like they could have explored that a little more, maybe gone a little more extreme on some of the ideas of the backwards world and trying to kind of outsmart the presents and things like that. But again, the film was an hour 40 minutes, so maybe they just didn't feel like they could fully explore that, and so just kind of went with this ending. But up until the ending, like the buildup is really good. I really loved that it was a haunting movie that then turned into kind of a more sinister type movie when she starts to realize that there's all these women that look like her, and her husband had this kind of double life. Like that was a very interesting aspect of it. And then when she went to the house, that was also interesting. So it's, up until there, it's a really great buildup and a really enjoyable movie. And then the ending just kind of was disappointing. But that's The Night House. Comes out August 20th, 2021, in theaters. Again, if you're looking for a horror movie, this Friday the 13th, there wasn't really a great horror movie. So maybe you're going to want to see this. Have a late Friday the 13th and go see The Night House if you're comfortable going to theaters. And again, if you have other ideas, if you have theories, things I missed, like there's a lot of information in this movie that kind of gets fleeting references to, which I do like. I do like when it doesn't really sit there and ruminate on things. But if you have other theories, if there's other information that I missed, please drop comments. I love to read it. I love to have a conversation about that. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the things I enjoy most about doing these reviews. If you liked this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot and make sure all of my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.